They thought the Indian who tended the barn was nobody until a colonel called him sir. But what they witnessed that morning in Copper Ridge would shatter everything they believed about power, respect, and the man they'd been stepping on for months. Ayanna moved through the shadows of the barn like he'd done every morning for the past year. His weathered hands worked methodically, spreading fresh hay across the wooden floor while the early light filtered through the cracks in the walls. The smell of horses and leather filled the air, mixing with the dust that danced in the golden beams. To anyone watching, he was just another hired hand, silent, invisible, forgotten. But the ingrained prejudice of Copper Ridge had made sure he knew his place. The barn doors creaked open and 3 men stepped inside. Thaddeus Crane, the town's self-appointed leader, strutted in first, his polished boots clicking arrogantly against the wooden planks. Behind him followed Dutch Morrison and Samuel Pike, both grinning like they'd found entertainment for the morning. Ayanna didn't look up from his work, but his shoulders tensed slightly. He knew that walk, that tone, that particular brand of casual cruelty that came with men who had nothing better to do than remind others of their perceived inferiority. "Well, well," Thaddeus drawled, his voice laced with the kind of authority that came from owning half the businesses in town. "Look who's still here, boys. Our faithful barnkeeper." Dutch snorted, his laughter echoing in the barn. "Faithful? More like he's got nowhere else to go. What Indian's going to hire another Indian, right?" Ayanna's hands never stopped moving, never acknowledged their presence. He'd learned long ago that responding only fueled their arrogance. But inside, something burned. Not anger exactly, but a quiet, simmering defiance that had been building for months. Samuel stepped closer, deliberately kicking over the bucket of fresh grain Ayanna had just prepared. The golden kernels scattered across the floor like scattered hopes. "Oops," he said with mock innocence, his eyes gleaming with malice. "Clumsy me, better clean that up, boy." The word boy hung in the air like a slap. Ayanna was 45 years old, had seen more hardship than these 3 combined, carried burdens they couldn't imagine. But here, in this moment, he was just boy to them. Thaddeus circled him slowly, like a predator studying wounded prey. "You know what I've been thinking? Maybe it's time we found ourselves a more suitable caretaker. Someone who understands how things work around here. Someone who fits in better with decent folk." Ayanna finally looked up, his dark eyes meeting Thaddeus's cold stare. There was something in that gaze. Not submission, not fear, but a depth that made Thaddeus shift uncomfortably. For just a moment, the merchant felt like he was staring into something vast and unknowable. Something that didn't belong in a barn cleaning stalls. "Cat got your tongue?" Dutch laughed, the sound grating. Or maybe he just doesn't speak civilized language. That's when the sound of hoofbeats thundered outside. Heavy, purposeful, military, the kind of riding that announced important business. All 4 men turned toward the barn doors as the rhythm grew closer, then stopped abruptly just outside. Ayanna's entire posture changed. The subtle shift was almost imperceptible, but somehow he seemed to grow taller, more alert, the lines on his face hardening with a quiet resolve. His weathered hands stilled on the pitchfork handle, and for the first time since the men had entered, something like anticipation flickered across his features. Thaddeus frowned, a flicker of unease crossing his face. Who the hell rides like that at this hour? The barn doors burst open with authority, and a figure stepped into the dusty light. The man wore a blue military uniform, perfectly pressed despite the long ride. Silver insignia caught the morning sun, and his bearing spoke of battles won and commands obeyed without question. This was a man accustomed to respect, to instant obedience, to having his words treated as law. Colonel Marcus Whitfield had arrived in Copper Ridge, but what happened when his eyes found Ayanna standing there among the scattered grain, and the sneering townsmen would change everything these men thought they knew about power, about respect, and about the quiet Indian they'd been tormenting for months. Colonel Marcus Whitfield scanned the barn with the practiced eye of a man who'd seen 1,000 different terrains. His gaze swept over the 3 townsmen, taking in their expensive clothes and self-satisfied expressions before settling on the scattered grain and the pitchfork in Ayanna's hands. The silence stretched like a taut rope, heavy with unspoken tension. Thaddeus stepped forward, puffing out his chest like a rooster claiming his territory. "Colonel, welcome to Copper Ridge. I'm Thaddeus Crane, and I speak for the decent folks in this town. I trust your journey wasn't too difficult." The colonel's eyes remained fixed on Ayanna, studying him with an intensity that made the other men shift uncomfortably. There was recognition there, a familiarity that went beyond casual observation. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of absolute authority. "Difficult?" Marcus repeated slowly, never breaking eye contact with Ayanna. "No, Mr. Crane. The journey was precisely as expected." Dutch Morrison couldn't contain himself. "Sir, if you're looking for lodging, we've got the finest rooms in town. Much better than what you'd find in some dirty barn with," he gestured dismissively toward Ayanna. "Well, with his kind." The temperature in the barn seemed to drop 10 degrees. Colonel Whitfield's jaw tightened, and when he turned to face Dutch, the merchant actually took a step backward. There was something dangerous in the officer's pale blue eyes, something that spoke of men who'd crossed him and paid dearly for it. "His kind," the colonel repeated, his voice dangerously quiet. Samuel Pike, sensing an opportunity to ingratiate himself, jumped in, his words tumbling over each other in his eagerness. "What Dutch means, sir, is that we've got proper accommodations. Christian folk, not like this Indian here who barely speaks English and can't even keep grain in a bucket." Ayanna's knuckles whitened on the pitchfork handle, but still he said nothing. His dark eyes flicked between the colonel and the townsman, and there was something calculating in his expression now, as if he was weighing possibilities that these men couldn't even fathom. Colonel Whitfield walked slowly across the barn floor, his boots crunching on the scattered grain. Each step seemed deliberate, measured, like a man approaching something momentous. The three townsmen watched with growing confusion as their visitor ignored them completely, moving instead toward the man they considered beneath notice. "Tell me," the colonel said, addressing Thaddeus without turning around, "how long has this man been employed in your town?" Thaddeus blinked, caught off guard by the question. "About a year, I suppose. Maybe longer. Hard to keep track with his type." "They come and go, do they?" Marcus stopped directly in front of Ayanna, close enough that the two men could speak without the others hearing. But instead of speaking, he did something that made Dutch's mouth fall open, and Samuel's eyes widen in shock. Colonel Marcus Whitfield, a man who commanded thousands of soldiers and answered only to generals, slowly removed his hat and held it respectfully at his side. The barn fell into absolute silence. Even the horses seemed to sense that something significant was unfolding, something that would upend the established order in ways these small-town men couldn't comprehend. But what the colonel said next would shatter their world completely, because the words that came from his mouth would reveal a truth so shocking that everything they thought they knew about power, about rank, and about the quiet man with the pitchfork would crumble to dust. The words that came from Colonel Whitfield's mouth cut through the barn like a blade through silk. "Sir." That single word hung in the dusty air, impossible and absolute. The colonel had addressed Ayanna as "Sir." Not with mockery, not with sarcasm, but with the kind of deep respect reserved for men of unquestionable authority. Thaddeus Crane's face went white, his carefully constructed facade of authority crumbling before his eyes. Dutch Morrison's jaw worked soundlessly like a fish pulled from water, his smugness replaced with stunned disbelief. Samuel Pike actually stumbled backward, knocking over a feed bucket that clattered against the wooden walls, the sound amplified in the sudden silence. None of them could process what they just witnessed. A United States Army colonel, a man whose word could move mountains and end lives, had just shown deference to the Indian they'd been treating like dirt. Ayanna straightened slowly, and for the first time since the townsman had entered the barn, he set down his pitchfork. The gesture was deliberate, final, a silent declaration of his true standing. When he turned to face Colonel Whitfield fully, the transformation was startling. Gone was the hunched posture of a subservient worker. In its place stood a man who carried himself with the kind of natural authority that couldn't be taught or faked. "Marcus," Ayanna said simply, his voice carrying a richness and clarity that made the three townsmen flinch. "I wondered when you'd find me." The colonel's weathered face broke into something that might have been relief, the lines around his eyes softening for the first time. "It took longer than I hoped, sir. The trail went cold after Fort Laramie." "Sir?" Thaddeus's voice cracked like a teenage boy's. "Colonel, surely there's been some mistake. He's just a barn hand. He cleans stalls and feeds horses." Marcus turned to face the merchant, and the look in his eyes could have frozen hell itself, a silent condemnation of his ignorance. "This man is clean of more than stalls, Mr. Crane. He's cleaned up messes that would have cost this nation everything." Dutch found his voice, though it came out as a squeak, his confidence utterly shattered. "But he's Indian. He don't speak proper. He ain't got no education or doesn't speak proper." Ayanna interrupted, his voice cutting through Dutch's stammering like a knife. "I speak 7 languages, Mr. Morrison. I've negotiated treaties that prevented wars. I've sat at tables with presidents and generals while you were learning to count coins in your father's store." The revelation hit the 3 men like physical blows, each word a hammer strike against their preconceived notions. Samuel Pike actually sat down hard on a hay bale, his face the color of ash, his arrogance replaced with a growing sense of dread. This couldn't be happening. The man they'd been humiliating, the worker they'd kicked and cursed and treated like property, was someone important enough to command a colonel's respect. "Who?" Thaddeus's voice was barely a whisper, his carefully constructed world crumbling around him. "Who are you?" Ayanna looked at him with eyes that suddenly seemed ancient, wise beyond the suffering these small men could inflict, holding centuries of knowledge and experience. "My name is Ayanna Two Eagles. I was Chief Scout for the United States Army. I've prevented 3 wars, saved countless lives, and earned the Congressional Medal of Honor for service above and beyond the call of duty." The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the rustling of the horses in their stalls. Each man processed the information differently. Thaddeus with growing horror at what he'd done, the realization of his colossal misjudgment sinking in. Dutch with the dawning realization of how badly he'd misjudged the situation, his prejudice blinding him to the truth. Samuel with the sick understanding that he'd just threatened a man who could destroy him with a single word, his bravado replaced with fear. Colonel Whitfield stepped closer to the townsman, his voice carrying the authority of cannon fire, each word a carefully aimed shot. "Gentlemen, you've just spent the morning humiliating one of the most decorated soldiers this country has ever produced, a man who's risked his life more times than you've drawn breath. But what happened next would prove that some forms of justice arrive with the force of thunder, a swift and undeniable reckoning. Because Ayanna Two Eagles was about to show these men exactly what happened when you mistook quiet dignity for weakness, and respect had to be earned the hard way." The barn felt smaller now, as if the weight of truth had compressed the very air, each breath a reminder of their failings. Thaddeus Crane's hands trembled as he tried to process what he just learned. The Congressional Medal of Honor, Chief Scout, a man who'd prevented wars while Thaddeus had been arguing over grain prices and property lines, his accomplishments dwarfing Thaddeus's petty ambitions. Colonel Whitfield reached into his coat and withdrew a leather portfolio, his movements deliberate and official, a symbol of the power he wielded. "Mr. Two Eagles, I bring orders from General Sherman himself. Your country needs you again." Ayanna's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his posture, the weight of responsibility settling upon him once more. The weight of old responsibilities, old loyalties settled on his shoulders like a familiar coat, a duty he couldn't ignore. "What's happened, Marcus?" "Apache raids along the southern territories. 3 settlements destroyed, families missing. The territorial governor is demanding military action, but we both know how that usually ends." The colonel's voice carried the exhaustion of a man who'd seen too much blood spilled for too little reason, the futility of endless conflict weighing heavily on his soul. "They need someone who can speak their language, someone they trust." Dutch Morrison's face had gone from white to green, his stomach churning with a mixture of fear and guilt. "Apache? You mean you're going to negotiate with savages?" The temperature in the barn plummeted again, the air thick with unspoken tension, the animals sensing the shift in energy. Ayanna turned to Dutch with the kind of slow, measured movement that predators used before striking, his eyes narrowed, focused. When he spoke, His voice was softer than before, but somehow infinitely more dangerous, each word laced with quiet menace. "Savages, Mr. Morrison?" Ayanna stepped closer, and Dutch instinctively backed against the barn wall, his bravado evaporating in the face of Ayanna's controlled intensity. "Tell me, in your vast experience with native peoples, how many Apache children have you seen starve because their hunting grounds were taken? How many Apache mothers have you watched bury sons killed for defending their homes?" Samuel Pike found his voice, though it shook like autumn leaves, his fear outweighing his prejudice. They attack innocent people. They're killers." "So am I." Ayanna's words hit like hammer blows, silencing Samuel's trembling voice. "I've killed more men than you've met in your entire life. The difference is I only kill when killing is the only language left to speak." Colonel Whitfield stepped forward, recognizing the dangerous current running through the conversation, his intervention preventing further escalation. "Sir, we need to discuss the mission parameters. Time is critical." But Ayanna wasn't finished with the townsman, his lesson far from complete. He reached into his shirt and withdrew something that made all three men gasp, their eyes fixated on the object in his hand. A silver star hung from a blue ribbon, its surface engraved with an eagle and the words, "For Valor," a testament to his bravery and selflessness. The Congressional Medal of Honor caught the morning light like a piece of captured sun, a symbol of his service and sacrifice. "This medal," Ayanna said, holding it so they could all see, "was awarded for saving an entire cavalry unit from massacre. I walked alone into an Apache camp, spoke for 3 days without food or water, and convinced a war chief to spare 200 soldiers' lives." Thaddeus's legs nearly gave out, his body betraying the weight of his guilt. You saved soldiers, white soldiers, American soldiers." "American soldiers," Ayanna corrected, his gaze unwavering, his words a sharp rebuke. "I don't see color when I see my countrymen dying." The irony wasn't lost on any of them, the weight of their prejudice crushing them. This man whom they'd treated as less than human had risked everything to save men who looked exactly like them. Men who probably held the same prejudices, the same casual cruelty. Their savior a man they deemed unworthy of respect. But what Ayanna did next would force these men to confront a choice that would define not just their mourning, but their very souls. A reckoning that would determine their future, because sometimes the measure of a man isn't found in how he treats his equals, but in how he responds when the tables turn completely. The true test of character revealed in moments of profound decision. Ayanna carefully placed the medal back inside his shirt, his actions deliberate and meaningful. The gesture somehow more powerful than any threat, a silent challenge to their conscience. When he looked up at the three townsmen, there was something different in his eyes now. Not anger, but a kind of patient disappointment that cut deeper than rage ever could. A judgment that resonated with profound sadness. "You want to know what's truly savage?" he asked, his voice carrying the weight of accumulated wisdom, the burden of centuries of injustice etched into his words. "It's treating a man like an animal because you're afraid to see the person underneath. It's choosing ignorance because knowledge might force you to change." Thaddeus opened his mouth to speak, to offer some feeble excuse, but no words came, his voice failing him in the face of his profound shame. What could he say? What apology could possibly cover months of deliberate cruelty? What excuse could justify the casual dehumanization of a man who'd bled for the very flag that flew over their town? Colonel Whitfield checked his pocket watch, the sound sharp in the heavy silence, the ticking a relentless reminder of the urgency of their mission. "Sir, we need to leave within the hour. The Apache situation grows worse by the day." Ayanna simply nodded, his decision already made. "Marcus," Ayanna said slowly, "there's something these gentlemen need to understand before we leave. About consequences, about choices." Samuel Pike's voice came out as a croak, his fear palpable. "What? What do you mean?" Ayanna turned to face him directly, his gaze piercing, unwavering. 3 months ago, you refused to sell grain to the Apache scouts who came to town. You called them red devils and said they could starve for all you cared." Samuel's face went ashen, his guilt consuming him. I didn't know they were scouts. I thought they were just..." Just what? Just human beings asking to buy food with honest money? Ayana's voice remained calm, but there was steel underneath, a quiet determination that brooked no argument. Those scouts were trying to prevent exactly what's happening now. They were offering to mediate before violence became the only option. Dutch Morrison stammered, desperately seeking a way to deflect responsibility. But we couldn't know. We ain't mind readers. No, Ayana agreed, his gaze unwavering. But you could have treated them like men instead of animals. You could have listened instead of judging. You could have chosen to see people instead of skin color. The full weight of their actions was starting to sink in, crushing them under its immense burden. Their prejudice hadn't just hurt feelings or bruised pride. It had contributed to a situation that might now cost lives. Real lives. Families destroyed because 3 men couldn't see past their own narrow fears, their bigotry fueling a conflict they were ill-equipped to handle. Colonel Whitfield's voice cut through their dawning horror, his words sharp and precise. The Apache who came to buy grain. One of them was Chief Standing Bear's nephew. When your town rejected them, they took it as a sign that negotiation was pointless. Thaddeus felt the world tilting around him, his carefully constructed reality crumbling into dust. You mean because we wouldn't sell them grain? They decided to fight instead of talk? Actions have consequences, Mr. Crane, Ayana said, his voice resonating with the wisdom of generations. Every choice echoes. Every moment of cruelty sends ripples through time. But what happened next would prove that some lessons can only be learned through experience, a harsh but necessary education. And some men only understand power when they feel it wielded against them, the weight of their own actions pressing down upon them. Because Ayana Two Eagles was about to show them exactly how fragile their comfortable world really was. A lesson they would never forget. Ayana walked to the barn door and looked out at the town of Copper Ridge spreading before them, his gaze sweeping across the familiar landscape. From this vantage point, he could see the general store where Samuel had refused service to Apache scouts, the saloon where Dutch had bragged about keeping undesirables out, and the bank where Thaddeus had denied loans to anyone with dark skin, each building a silent testament to their prejudice. You see that town out there? Ayana asked, not turning around, his voice carrying a profound sadness. Every building, every business, every family living in peace. It exists because men like me have bled to keep it safe. Colonel Whitfield stepped beside him, understanding where this was heading, his presence a silent affirmation of Ayana's purpose. Sir, perhaps we should focus on the mission. The mission starts here, Marcus. Ayana's voice carried the authority of a man accustomed to making decisions that affected thousands, his will unshakable. These men need to understand what they've put at risk. He turned back to face the 3 townsmen. And now there was something unmistakably military in his bearing, a shift in demeanor that commanded attention. This wasn't the quiet barn worker they'd been tormenting. This was a strategist, a leader, a man who'd shaped the fate of territories, his presence demanding respect. Mr. Crane, as the self-appointed leader of this town, you're going to make a choice right now. Thaddeus swallowed hard, his fear palpable. What? What kind of choice? The Apache raids I'm being sent to stop. They're moving this direction. 3 war parties, maybe 40 warriors total, and they're angry enough to burn everything between here and the territorial capital. Ayana's words fell like stones into still water, sending ripples of fear through the silent barn. I can stop them. I can negotiate a peace that keeps your families alive and your town standing. The silence stretched until Samuel couldn't bear it anymore, the weight of his fear crushing him. What do you want from us? Nothing you shouldn't have given freely. Ayana stepped closer to the 3 men, his gaze unwavering, his presence commanding. Respect, basic human dignity, the understanding that a man's worth isn't determined by the color of his skin or the clothes on his back. Dutch's voice was barely a whisper, his bravado utterly gone. And if we promise to do better? Promises are just words, Mr. Morrison. I've heard plenty of words, Ayana interrupted, his skepticism evident in his tone. But actions? Actions tell the truth. Ayana reached for his hat, the gesture signaling an end to the conversation, a silent dismissal of their empty promises. Colonel Whitfield checked his watch again, his patience wearing thin. "Sir, we really must go. Every hour we delay means more lives at risk." Thaddeus stepped forward desperately, his voice pleading, "Wait, please! What can we do? How can we make this right?" Ayanna paused at the barn door, his silhouette framed against the morning light, a figure of quiet strength and unwavering resolve. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of absolute finality, a judgment they couldn't escape. "You can start by treating the next stranger who comes to your town like a human being instead of a threat. You can choose to see people instead of prejudices. You can remember that the man you step on today might be the only one who can save you tomorrow." He placed his hat on his head with military precision, a final act of closure, a silent farewell. "As for making this right with me, you can't. But you can make sure it never happens again." But what these men didn't know was that their reckoning was far from over, because the choice Ayanna was about to make would either save their town or leave them to face the consequences of their hatred alone, their fate hanging in the balance. Colonel Whitfield followed Ayanna toward the barn doors, but stopped when he realized the three townsmen weren't moving. They stood frozen in place like men who'd just watched their world collapse and rebuild itself in the span of minutes, their minds struggling to process the magnitude of what had transpired. "There's something else," Ayanna said, turning back one final time, his voice filled with a different tone, not anger or disappointment, but something that might have been mercy, a flicker of compassion for their ignorance. Thaddeus looked up with desperate hope, clinging to the possibility of redemption. "What is it?" "The night you decided I wasn't fit to eat in your restaurant, Mr. Crane, I was returning from a mission where I'd spent 6 days tracking down the men who murdered a family outside Prescott. White family, mother, father, 2 children. Ayanna's words came steady and clear, each one a dagger to Thaddeus's heart. I brought their killers back to justice, all of them. The revelation hit Thaddeus like a physical blow, a staggering realization of his own blindness. You were protecting us even after what we did." His voice filled with a mixture of shame and awe. "I wasn't protecting you specifically," Ayanna corrected, his gaze unwavering. "I was protecting the idea that families should be safe in their homes, that children should grow up without fear, that mothers shouldn't have to bar their doors at night." Dutch Morrison's face crumpled, his bravado shattered, his soul laid bare. "God Almighty, what have we done?" "You've learned," Ayanna said simply, his tone devoid of malice, only a quiet acceptance. "Sometimes that's all any of us can do." Colonel Whitfield stepped forward, sensing the moment was reaching its conclusion, his presence a subtle reminder of the urgency of their mission. "Sir, the horses are ready. We need to reach Apache territory before Chief Standing Bear loses patience with diplomacy." Ayanna nodded, then did something that surprised everyone in the barn. A final act of grace that would forever alter their perception. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small leather pouch, his fingers carefully retrieving the contents. From it, he pulled 3 silver coins and placed them on the wooden rail where he'd been spreading hay, his actions deliberate and meaningful. "My wages," he said, his voice filled with a quiet dignity. "For the year I worked in your barn, I never collected them." Samuel Pike stared at the coins as if they were poison, repulsed by the offering. We never paid you. We never even offered." His voice filled with shame and remorse. "I know." Ayanna's voice held no bitterness, only a quiet sadness, a profound understanding of human nature. "But I earned them honestly, and honest work deserves honest pay, even when the employers forget their obligations." The 3 men looked at those silver coins and saw something more than money. They saw a reflection of their own failures, a measurement of how far they'd fallen from the men they thought they were, a tangible symbol of their prejudice and injustice. "Keep the money," Thaddeus said, his voice breaking, his heart filled with regret. "Please, it's the least we can do." "I don't want your money, Mr. Crane. I want you to remember this moment. I want you to remember that character isn't about the color of a man's skin or the clothes he wears. It's about what he does when no one is watching and what he chooses when everything is at stake." But as Ayanna Two Eagles prepared to leave Copper Ridge forever, none of them could have predicted that this moment of reckoning would transform not just 3 bitter men, but an entire town's understanding of what it truly meant to be human. a legacy of compassion and understanding that would endure for generations to come. Ayanna Two Eagles walked out of that barn as the morning sun climbed higher over Copper Ridge, leaving behind a shattered past and a glimmer of hope for the future. But he didn't walk alone. Colonel Whitfield rode beside him as they left the town behind, heading toward Apache territory and a mission that would determine the fate of countless lives, their journey a testament to their unwavering commitment to peace and justice. Behind them, 3 men stood in the dusty barn, staring at the silver coins that gleamed like accusations in the morning light, their silence broken only by the rustling of the horses. The scattered grain still lay across the wooden floor, a reminder of their cruelty. But somehow it looked different now, its presence a constant rebuke. Not like the mess of a careless worker, but like the evidence of their own cruelty, a tangible reminder of their past transgressions. Thaddeus Crane picked up one of the coins with trembling fingers, the weight of his guilt overwhelming him. It was warm from Ayanna's pocket, real and solid and honest, a symbol of the man he had wronged. Everything he'd failed to be, a testament to his moral failings. "What do we do now?" Samuel Pike asked, his voice barely above a whisper, his hope clinging to the possibility of redemption. For the first time in years, Thaddeus Crane didn't have an answer, his usual confidence replaced with uncertainty and remorse. He didn't have a plan or a scheme or a way to twist the situation to his advantage. All he had was the crushing weight of understanding what they'd done and what it had cost, a burden he would carry for the rest of his days. 2 weeks later, news reached Copper Ridge that Ayanna Two Eagles had successfully negotiated peace with Chief Standing Bear, his diplomacy averting bloodshed. No settlements were burned, no families were murdered, no children became orphans. The Apache raids stopped, and the territorial governor called it a miracle of diplomacy, a triumph of understanding over violence. But the 3 men who'd tormented a barn worker knew it wasn't a miracle. It was the work of a man they'd tried to break, a man who'd chosen to save lives even after being treated like dirt, his selflessness a stark contrast to their own prejudice. The change in Copper Ridge didn't happen overnight, their transformation gradual and hard-earned. But it happened, a testament to the power of forgiveness and understanding. Thaddeus Crane began selling supplies to anyone with honest money, regardless of skin color, his business practices guided by fairness and compassion. Samuel Pike started learning Apache words from the scouts who came to trade, treating them like the men they were, his prejudice replaced with genuine curiosity and respect. Dutch Morrison took down the sign that had once warned certain people away from his establishment, his saloon becoming a place of welcome for all. They never saw Ayanna Two Eagles again, his legend fading into the mists of history. He completed his mission, negotiated 3 more peace treaties, and eventually disappeared into the vast territories where men could live by their own codes, his legacy secured. Some said he returned to his people, embracing his heritage and finding solace in his roots. Others claimed he'd gone east to work with the government on Indian policy, advocating for the rights of his people and striving for a more just society. The truth was, it didn't matter where he went, his impact transcending his physical presence. What mattered was what he'd left behind, a legacy of understanding and compassion that would inspire generations. Years later, when new strangers came to Copper Ridge, men with different skin, different languages, different ways of seeing the world, they found something unexpected, a town transformed. They found a town that had learned to look past appearances, to measure character by actions rather than assumptions, to remember that every human being carried invisible depths that deserved respect, a beacon of hope in a world often divided by prejudice and fear. The 3 silver coins still sat on the mantel in Thaddeus Crane's house, a constant reminder of his past mistakes. A daily reminder of the day they learned that power isn't about who you can step on, but about who you choose to lift up. A symbol of their transformation and their commitment to justice. And sometimes, just sometimes, the man you think has nothing to offer might be the only one who can save everything you hold dear, a truth they had learned at great cost. So, what's the big takeaway from Ayanna's story in Copper Ridge? It's that true strength lies not in power or prejudice, but in understanding and compassion. That even in the face of injustice, Choosing to see the humanity in others can create ripples of change that last generations. It's a powerful reminder to challenge our own biases and to recognize the inherent worth in every single person we encounter. What did you think? Did this story resonate with you? Leave a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts, any questions you might have, or maybe even a similar story you've experienced yourself. Let's get a conversation going. And if you enjoyed this story and the message it carries, please subscribe so you don't miss out on future tales of transformation, resilience, and the enduring power of the human spirit. Thanks for watching.